Chapter 1: The Sound of Solitude. Nora Gray's heart thrummed with a blend of excitement and anxiety as her small propeller plane descended towards the rugged, untouched expanses of Alaska. As a sound engineer, she had traversed many wild places, capturing the whispers and roars of nature for acclaimed nature documentaries. Yet, Alaska promised something deeper, a solitude profound enough to mirror the silence she felt within her own life since the tumultuous end of her long-term relationship 6 months prior. Upon landing, she was greeted by the crisp, cold air, a stark contrast to the stifling city life she'd left behind in Seattle. The small airport was little more than a runway and a rustic building that doubled as a terminal and a cafe. Nora collected her bags, which included her prized audio equipment, and stepped outside to wait for the ride to her cabin. Her temporary home was a small, isolated cabin on the edge of a vast national park, chosen for its proximity to some of the most diverse wildlife habitats in North America. The drive was silent except for the gravel crunching under the tires and the occasional distant cry of an eagle. The landscape was a sprawling canvas of spruce and birch trees, punctuated by the dramatic peaks of distant mountains. Arriving at the cabin, Nora was struck by the simplicity and ruggedness of her surroundings. The cabin was functional, a single-story log structure with the bare essentials. Inside, the furnishings were sparse: a bed, a wood stove, a table, and a few chairs. It was perfect for her needs. The real luxury was outside, where an endless wild awaited to be heard and recorded. After settling in, Nora wasted no time setting up her recording equipment. She had a state-of-the-art digital audio recorder, a selection of microphones, and a parabolic reflector to capture distant sounds. Her goal was to record a soundscape of the Alaskan wilderness for a new documentary focusing on the effects of climate change on isolated ecosystems. That evening, as the sun began its long, slow descent towards the horizon, a process that took hours in the Alaskan summer, Nora ventured outside with her gear. The air was filled with the subtle sounds of the wilderness, the rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze, the distant ripple of a river, and the occasional call of a bird. But what captivated her most was the profound silence that lay beneath these sounds. It was a silence so deep it felt almost tangible, like a soft blanket wrapping around her. As darkness slowly approached, Nora remained outside, headphones on, listening deeply to the symphony of natural sounds. It was during these moments that she felt a connection to the world around her, a feeling of being part of something greater that both humbled and elevated her spirit. That night, back in the cabin, Nora lay in bed listening to the crackle of the wood stove. The solitude was palpable, and yet, she didn't feel alone. Instead, she felt a part of the vast, breathing landscape outside her door, a landscape that, like her, whispered in the day and sighed in the quiet of the night. The first night in Alaska promised the beginning of a journey not just into the heart of the wilderness, but into the heart of her own solitude, where she hoped to find not just sounds for her documentary, but answers to the quiet yearnings of her soul. Chapter 2: A Howl in the Dark. Nora's first few days were filled with the everyday sounds of the wilderness: whine through the leaves, the distant rush of waterfalls, and the calls of birds. She captured each with a methodical precision that matched the pace of her surroundings. Yet, she found herself increasingly fixated on a sound she had yet to record, something unique that would embody the soul of this vast wilderness. On her fourth night, as twilight mingled with the shadows, Nora set up her equipment near a clearing, a known gathering place for wildlife due to the small creek that meandered through it. She was testing a new microphone setup under the dim glow of her headlamp when it pierced the night, the distant, haunting call of a wolf. It was a long, melancholic howl that seemed to carry the stories of the wild within its sound waves. Instantly captivated, Nora stood frozen, her heart sinking with the rhythm of the unseen wolf's call. It was a sound that spoke directly to her, a lonely echo in the vast darkness, and she felt an inexplicable connection. As the echo faded, she was left with a lingering silence that seemed even more profound. Determined to capture this elusive howl on her recordings, Nora decided that this would be her project's focal point. Over the next several days, she ventured deeper into the park, her equipment always at the ready. Each night brought new sounds, but the wolf's call remained elusive, a ghostly presence that was heard but never seen. Her determination turned into a mild obsession. She knew that capturing this howl could be the key element that would bring her documentary to life, embodying the raw, untamed spirit of Alaska. It was during one of these nightly excursions that Nora first met Alec. She had ventured further than usual, deep into the territory marked on her map as frequented by wolf packs. The sky was a clear vault of stars, the air crisp and biting. She was setting up her recorder when she heard the rustle of footsteps behind her. Turning, she saw a figure approaching, a man dressed in a park ranger's uniform. His appearance was rugged, his beard a rough shadow under the starlight, and his eyes held a cautious curiosity. "Evening," he called out as he approached, his voice low and somewhat wary. "You're quite a ways out here. Everything okay?" Nora explained her mission, and her words seemed to relax him. He introduced himself as Alec, a wildlife biologist monitoring the local wolf populations. He was intrigued by her project and offered his insights into the wolves' behaviors and patterns. "Wolves are more than just their howls," Alec told her as they talked beside her setup. "They're about connection, family. That howl, it's a call to gather, a signal in the vastness, much like what you seem to be searching for." His words struck a chord with Nora. The connection she felt wasn't just to the howl, but to the community and communication it represented. This was what she needed to capture, not just the sound itself, but what it meant. Alec offered to help her track the wolves, promising to increase her chances of recording them. Grateful and excited, Nora agreed, and they made plans to meet the next day. As Alec walked away, blending back into the night, Nora felt a new surge of hope. Perhaps, with Alec's help, she would find her howl in the dark, and maybe, just maybe, she would also find the connection she had been unknowingly searching for. Chapter 3: First Tracks. The next morning dawned clear and cold, the sun casting pale light over the frostbitten landscape. Nora met Alec at the edge of the woods, where they had planned to begin their search. He carried a backpack filled with tracking equipment and a pair of binoculars slung around his neck. His presence was reassuring, a reminder of the expertise he brought to this quest. As they set off into the forest, Alec began to share more about the wolves. "There's a pack in this area known as the Shadow Creek Pack," he explained, his eyes scanning the horizon. "They roam quite extensively, but they leave signs, tracks, and sometimes, if you're lucky, you can hear them communicating with each other." Nora listened intently, her recorder switched on and hanging from her neck, ready to capture any sounds. The forest around them was waking up, the air filled with the chirps and whistles of birds, but beneath that, there was a quieter, more profound silence, the kind that hinted at the presence of larger, more elusive creatures. They walked for hours, the terrain varying from dense underbrush to open fields dotted with wildflowers. Alec pointed out signs of wildlife, a nibbled bush here, a scratched tree there, and once, a distant deer pausing in a meadow before bounding away. Finally, Alec halted and gestured for Nora to come closer. At the edge of a muddy bank, there were fresh tracks. "Wolf prints," he said, crouching down. Nora knelt beside him, examining the paw prints that pressed deep into the mud. "They're fresh. Passed through here probably just after dawn." The reality of being so close to these wild animals sent a thrill through Nora. She set up her microphone near the tracks, hoping to catch any residual sounds the wolves might have left behind. The air was heavy with the musk of the forest, and every rustle of leaves heightened the anticipation. As they continued following the tracks, Alec shared his philosophy about tracking. "It's about patience and respect," he said. "We're visitors in their territory, observers of their world. The less we interfere, the more they reveal." Nora felt a deep respect for his approach, and it mirrored her own beliefs about recording nature, observing, never intruding. They spent the rest of the day tracking, but the wolves remained unseen phantoms, their howls silent. As the sun began to set, painting the sky with strokes of orange and pink, they decided to head back. That night, back at her cabin, Nora reviewed the recordings. Among the subtle rustlings and distant bird calls, there was something else, a faint howl, almost imperceptible. A shiver ran through her. It was the wolf, distant and almost dreamlike, but it was there. The next day, Nora met Alec again, filled with new energy. They ventured deeper into the woods, following more tracks, learning the patterns of the wolves. Each step, each day spent in the wilderness, brought Nora closer not only to capturing the sounds she sought but also to understanding the intricate balance of nature. The connection with Alec also deepened, the shared days of tracking creating a bond forged in the quiet moments of waiting and watching. Nora found herself not only listening to the sounds of the forest but also to the quieter, more reflective thoughts Alec shared about life and nature. First tracks, Alec had said, are just the beginning of the story. Nora realized that this was not just about finding wolves. It was about discovering a part of herself that resonated with the untamed spirit of the wilderness, a part she had not known was lost. As they walked back through the twilight forest, Nora knew she was not just following wolf tracks, she was also tracing the pathways of her own reawakening. Chapter 4, Under the Northern Lights. Several days into their expedition, as autumn whispered its approach through the chilly air and shorter days, Nora and Alec found themselves deep within a part of the national park few ventured to explore. The landscape here was more rugged, the mountains more imposing, and the nights darker, pierced only by the stars and, on special evenings, the ethereal dance of the northern lights. That evening, as they settled into a small clearing ringed by ancient pines, Alec glanced up, noticing the faint shimmer of green beginning to streak across the sky. "Looks like we're in for a show tonight," he murmured, his voice tinged with awe. Nora, setting down her recording equipment, looked up and felt her breath catch at the sight. The aurora borealis was unfurling above them, ribbons of green and purple light weaving through the starlit sky. They built a small fire, the flickering flames casting a warm glow against the encroaching cold. As the lights above swirled and danced, Alec shared more about his life, the conversation meandering like the trails they had followed. He spoke of his early years in Alaska, the son of a wildlife photographer and a geologist, which instilled in him a profound respect for nature's nuances and its need for protection. "The northern lights," Alec began, his eyes reflecting the fire's glow, "are caused by particles from the sun colliding with the Earth's atmosphere. It's a spectacular reminder of our planet's place in the universe, of the wild and beautiful forces that operate beyond our control." Nora listened, drawn not only to the story of the lights, but to the deeper timbre of Alec's voice, the way his words hinted at layers and depths yet to be explored. She found herself sharing more freely than she had in a long time, telling Alec about her dreams of capturing sounds that could move people, that could make them feel the pulse of the planet just as this night sky did. As the aurora peaked, casting an otherworldly glow over the landscape, Alec turned to her. "Do you think, maybe, that's why the wolves howl? As a reminder of their own voices in this vast world, a call to witness the beauty and wildness that we're part of?" Nora considered this, her gaze shifting from the lights above to the man beside her. There was a wildness to Alec, too, she realized, a spirit not unlike the wolves he studied, both part of the landscape yet distinctly apart from it. "Maybe that's why I record," she replied softly, her voice barely above a whisper, afraid to break the spell of the night. "To remind us of the echoes we leave behind, the marks we make on the world and each other." They sat in silence for a long time, watching as the light slowly faded, leaving a profound darkness that felt less empty for their shared experience. The fire had burned down to embers, and the cold was creeping in, but the warmth between them was palpable. That night, under the fading glow of the northern lights, Nora felt something shift within her, a realization that her journey to capture the elusive howl of the wolves was also leading her towards a deeper understanding of her own place in the wild tapestry of life. With Alec beside her, the loneliness that had once echoed through her heart like the distant howls of the wolves seemed to quiet, replaced by a burgeoning connection that promised new possibilities, as mysterious and beautiful as the aurora itself. Chapter 5: Echoes of the Past. As Nora and Alec continued their exploration deeper into the Alaskan wilderness, the crisp air of approaching winter began to hint at the inevitability of change. One morning, while following a fresh set of wolf tracks that meandered through a dense copse of spruce trees, they stumbled upon an old, abandoned cabin, its wood weathered and gray, almost camouflaged against the backdrop of the forest. Curiosity piqued, Alec led the way, stepping carefully over the threshold, while Nora followed, her recorder in hand, capturing the creak of the old wood under their weight. Inside, the cabin told a story of long-forgotten days, dusty shelves, a rusted tin cup on a table, and an old journal, its pages yellowed with age, left open as if waiting for its writer to return. Alec picked up the journal, carefully turning the brittle pages. "Looks like this was a trapper's cabin," he observed, reading aloud a passage about the harsh winter and the wolves' movements. "These woods are full of stories. Some written, some held to the moon." Nora listened, her imagination captivated by the echoes of the past that seemed to permeate the air around them. "It's like the forest keeps these stories safe," she mused, waiting for someone to hear them again. They spent the rest of the day at the cabin, Nora recording the ambient sounds, while Alec explored the area for more clues about its former inhabitant. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the broken windows, Alec found a series of photographs tucked away in a drawer. They were black and white, depicting a man with a stern face, several huskies, and expansive views of the wilderness. "These might have been his companions," Alec said, pointing to the dogs in the photos. "Wolves and dogs share a lot of behaviors, it's no wonder those who lived out here relied on them so much." That evening, as they made their way back to their camp, the conversation turned to their own histories. Alec shared more about his family's legacy of conservation and his deep-seated need to protect these lands. Nora spoke of her parents, her upbringing in a bustling city, and her yearning for something more primal, more real, a yearning that had driven her to the wilds of Alaska. "Coming here, doing this, it's helped me understand a part of myself I didn't even know was lost," Nora confessed as they walked. The path beneath their feet was littered with fallen leaves, the air filled with the sharp scent of pine and the encroaching cold of night. Alec stopped, turning to face her under the canopy of ancient trees. "Maybe that's the real journey," he suggested softly, "not just finding places or sounds, but finding parts of ourselves in these echoes of the past." That night, back at their camp, the fire crackling between them, Nora couldn't help but feel that her recordings of this place would capture more than just the sounds of nature. They would capture a journey of discovery, of the land, its history, and her own internal wilderness. As the flames flickered, casting both light and shadows, she realized that every echo, every sound she captured was a layer of her own story being revealed, each one intertwined with the whispers of the past that still roamed these woods. Chapter 6: The Storm Breaks. Several days after their discovery of the trapper's cabin, as the season edged closer to winter, the weather turned sharply. Dark, heavy clouds rolled over the mountains, a harbinger of the fierce storm brewing on the horizon. Nora and Alec, aware of the shifting patterns, prepared to hunker down at their base camp, a sturdy but simple setup nestled between protective ridges. As the first gusts of the storm swept through the valley, rattling the canvas of their tents, Alec checked their supplies while Nora secured her recording equipment. The atmosphere was charged, not just with the electricity of the impending storm, but with a palpable tension between them, a mix of exhilaration and apprehension about the enclosed proximity during the storm. Nora secured her recording equipment. The atmosphere was charged, not just with the electricity of the impending storm, but with a palpable tension between them, a mix of exhilaration and apprehension about the enclosed proximity during the storm. The wind howled, mimicking the wolves they tracked, as if nature itself was speaking in tongues only they could understand. Inside the main tent, they spread out maps and notes, planning their next moves once the storm passed. However, as the rain began to pelt down in relentless sheets, their focus shifted from the external to the internal. Alec lit a lantern, its glow soft and flickering against the canvas walls, and they found themselves talking about fears, not just about the storm or the wild but deeper, more personal fears. Alec admitted his concern about the future of these lands, under threat from climate change and human encroachment. Nora shared her fear of never finding what she was truly looking for, both in her career and in her life. The storm intensified, the fabric of the tent straining against the wind's might. They moved closer, almost instinctively, for warmth and perhaps for something more, a comfort found in each other's voices against the fury outside. Nature's a powerful force, Alec shouted over the roar, but it's also fragile. Like us. Nora nodded, her thoughts drifting to the recording she hoped to make sounds that could perhaps change a few minds, inspire protection for these places. She felt a sudden surge of determination to capture not just the storm's fury but its dialogue with the land. As the night deepened and the storm reached its peak, Alec and Nora found themselves sharing a space smaller than either had anticipated, both physically in the cramped tent and emotionally, as their conversations delved into personal dreams and disappointments. Then, in a brief lull in the storm, a distant howl sliced through the night. They paused, listening. Another followed, closer this time, a primal cry that resonated with the storm's chaos. "It's them," Nora whispered, her voice filled with awe. "The wolves. They're out there." Alec nodded, his eyes reflecting a mix of respect and wonder. "They don't hide from the storm. They announce themselves to it, challenge it." The metaphor wasn't lost on Nora. Like the wolves, she and Alec were facing their own storms, not just the weather, but what lay within. The storm outside might break against the mountains and trees, but the storm within them was breaking barriers, revealing feelings and fears that had been tucked away like the photographs in the trapper's cabin. By the time the storm began to wane, giving way to the eerie calm that often followed such wild displays, Nora and Alec had discovered a new closeness. The storm had not only altered the landscape around them, but had shifted something essential between them. They fell asleep to the sound of rain tapering off and the distant replies of the wolves, both feeling less isolated than before, both in the wilderness and in their own personal quests. Chapter 7: The Silence Between. In the days following the storm, the forest seemed to hold its breath, the silence profound and reflective. Nora and Alec, now accustomed to each other's presence, moved through the woods with a new understanding, their steps quiet, their voices softer. The storm had cleared the air, and with it, seemed to have cleared some of the unspoken hesitations between them. They continued their work, tracking the wolves, recording sounds, and sharing long conversations by the fire. Yet, as the end of Nora's project neared, a new kind of tension surfaced, the awareness of their looming separation. Nora would soon return to her city life, her studio, and her audiences, leaving the wilderness behind. Alec would stay, continuing his conservation efforts, rooted in the land he was so deeply connected to. One afternoon, as they followed a fresh trail, Alec stopped and turned to Nora. "It's strange," he began, hesitating, "how silence can be so loud, isn't it? The space between words sometimes says more than the words themselves." Nora nodded, understanding immediately. The silence between them was filled with unsaid things, questions about possibilities, the feasibility of dreams shared under the northern lights, the practicalities of lives lived worlds apart. They spent that day mostly in silence, each lost in their thoughts, the air between them thick with the weight of unasked questions. As evening approached, they set up their recording equipment near a ridge, where the view opened to a vast panorama of the valley below, bathed in the golden light of the setting sun. As they waited for the wolves, the silence lingered. Nora broke it, her voice low. "I don't want to leave with things left unsaid, Alec. This, us, has been unexpected. I'm not sure what happens next, but I know this has changed me." Alec looked at her, his face serious. "Me too. I didn't expect this." But the reality of our lives, it's like two diverging paths in these woods. I don't know how or if they can merge. They turned their attention back to the landscape as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the valley. The recorder picked up the faintest sounds, a breeze whispering through the grass, the distant call of a bird returning to its nest, the subtle shift of the earth cooling down. Then, the wolves howled, a mournful yet beautiful sound that echoed across the valley, resonant and full of life. Nora and Alec listened, the recorder capturing every nuance of their calls. It was a poignant moment, the beauty of the wilderness expressing what they could not. As darkness enveloped them, they packed up their equipment. The walk back was quiet, each step taking them closer to the end of their shared journey. Back at camp, they shared a meal, the fire crackling between them, mirroring the flicker of emotions in their eyes. The night grew deep, and the fire burned down to embers. Nora finally spoke, her voice soft but clear. Whatever happens, I'm grateful for this, for you. You've shown me a part of the world, and a part of myself, that I needed to see. Alec reached across, his hand finding hers in the dim light. And you've given me hope that there are people out there who can hear what the wilderness is saying, who understand why it needs to be protected. That's no small thing. Their final night in the wilderness passed in a series of silences and soft conversations, a testament to the profound connection they had forged, one that, like the echoes of the wolves' howls, would resonate long after the sounds faded away. Chapter 8: The Final Howl. As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, painting the sky in strokes of pink and orange, Nora and Alec prepared for their last day in the wilderness. The air was crisp, a reminder of the encroaching end of autumn, and with it, the end of their time together. They moved with a quiet efficiency, a tacit acknowledgement of their looming departure. Today's plan was to capture one final recording, a culmination of all the sounds and experiences they had gathered. They wanted to find the wolves one last time, to record their haunting howls as a poignant symbol of the wilderness they had come to know together. They trekked deeper into the forest than they had before, following signs that indicated the presence of the wolf pack. The terrain became rougher, the beauty of the untouched wilderness more pronounced. Nora felt a mixture of excitement and melancholy, each step forward was a step toward the end. Mid-morning, they reached a high ridge overlooking a wide valley. Below, the land was alive with the vibrant colors of late fall, a breathtaking canvas of reds, yellows, and oranges. Alec set up his binoculars, scanning the valley, while Nora prepared her recording equipment. There, Alec whispered, his voice tense with excitement. He pointed to a spot near a small creek where a few wolves had gathered. Nora's heart raced as she positioned her microphone, aiming it towards the distant figures. The air was still, the world holding its breath. And then it came, carried on the breeze, a long, mournful howl, soon joined by others. The sound was both beautiful and sad, filled with the essence of the wild. Nora recorded fervently, capturing every nuance of the howls, knowing this was the sound she had been seeking, the one that would bring her documentary to life. As the howls faded, a silence fell over the valley. Nora and Alec stood side by side, listening to the quiet, feeling the weight of the moment. Finally, Alec turned to her, his eyes reflecting the wild landscape. "You got what you came for," he said softly. Nora nodded, unable to speak, her emotions tangled like the underbrush around them. She had captured the sounds, but she had found so much more. She had discovered a connection with Alec, with the wilderness, and with parts of herself she hadn't known were lost. They made their way back to the camp in silence, each lost in their thoughts. When they arrived, it was time to pack up, to dismantle the physical space that had defined their shared existence these past weeks. As they worked, Alec stopped and pulled something from his bag. It was a small, beautifully carved wooden wolf. "I made this," he said, handing it to her. "A reminder of the wild, and of us." Nora took it, her fingers tracing the smooth contours of the carving. Thank you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. This means more than you know. When everything was packed, they stood facing each other, the forest around them alive with the sounds of a waking world. I guess this is it, Nora said, struggling to keep her voice steady. Yeah, Alec replied, his face solemn. This is it. But it doesn't have to be the end. Not really. We've shared something incredible here, something that doesn't just disappear. They hugged, a long, tight embrace that spoke of reluctant goodbyes and the hope of future meetings. As Nora turned to leave, Alec called out to her. She turned back, and he smiled. Listen to the wild sometimes, okay? It'll keep us connected. Nora nodded, her eyes wet with tears, and walked away. As she left the wilderness behind, the sound of a distant howl followed her, a wild and poignant farewell that echoed through the forest, a final howl that would resonate within her, guiding her back to the wild, perhaps someday, back to Alec.